All right, today we're diving into a really fascinating Indian Supreme Court case, Srinivas Rao versus DA Deepa. And what makes it so interesting is that it all boiled down to one single question, a question that ended up completely redefining the meaning of cruelty in a marriage.
So let's just jump right to the heart of it. Think about this for a second. Can you actually be legally cruel to your spouse if you haven't even lived with them for years? It sounds kind of weird, right? Almost impossible. But believe it or not, that exact paradox was the central issue in this landmark case.
Okay, so let's back up a bit and set the scene. Like a lot of these legal dramas, this one starts pretty simply, with the marriage of Srinivas Rao and DA Deepa.
Now, the timeline here is straightforward, but it's super important. They get married, but, well, things go south, and they go south fast. This leads to them separating for a long time, and eventually the husband, Mr. Rao, decides he's had enough and files for divorce. And his reason? He claims cruelty.
And here's the kicker, the detail that changes everything. We're not talking about a brief separation here. By the time this whole thing finally reached the Supreme Court, they had been living apart for almost a decade, 10 years. You got to remember that number, because that decade of separation is what this entire legal fight is really all about.
So you're probably wondering, okay, what exactly was going on during those 10 years? Well, this is where a messy private dispute turns into a major legal precedent. The wife, DA Deepa, launched what the court itself would later describe as a full-blown campaign of allegations.
And we're not talking about small stuff. Her actions were serious, official legal moves. She filed criminal complaints under Section 498A, that's India's very strict dowry harassment law. And an accusation there can get you arrested right away. And get this, she didn't just go after her husband, she implicated his whole family. She went to the police, the local women's cell, filing formal charges of criminal misconduct. This was way beyond just angry words. These were severe legal attacks. But it didn't even stop there. The fight escalated. It moved from the personal and the legal to the professional. She started writing letters directly to her husband's boss, his employer. And these letters weren't just airing grievances. The court later found they were filled with derogatory, defamatory stuff. She was calling him and his mother dowry offenders in a professional setting, clearly trying to wreck his reputation and, his career.
Just to give you an idea of how severe these allegations got, get this. She made this absolutely scandalous claim that her mother-in-law had told her to sleep with her own father-in-law. I mean, wow. The court pointed this out specifically, saying an accusation like that is clearly designed to do one thing: cause maximum humiliation and agony.
So with all of this as the backdrop, the case starts making its way through the courts, and what follows is this incredible legal tug-of-war.
And this is where things get really interesting. First, the case goes to the family court. They look at everything, the complaints, the letters to the employer, and they say, yep, this is mental cruelty. Divorce granted. But then, the case goes up to the high court, and they slam on the brakes. They completely reverse the decision. And their reasoning was, well, it was pretty old school. They basically said, hey, they don't live together, so how can her actions possibly count as matrimonial cruelty?
So now you've got a total standoff. Two different courts, two completely opposite rulings, all because they can't agree on what cruelty even means in this context. When you have a deadlock like that, there's only one place left to go. The case was now on its way to the Supreme Court of India for the final word.
All right, this brings us to the main event, the final act. What did the Supreme Court have to say? Because their decision was about to make some serious waves.
So the first thing the court did was go right back to square one. They asked, what is mental cruelty, really? And they defined it pretty clearly. It's any conduct that causes so much mental pain and suffering that it becomes impossible for the other person to stay in the marriage. Notice what's important there. It's the effect of the actions, not where the people are when they do them.
And that leads us to the money quote, the single most important line in this whole case. The Supreme Court stated, clearly, staying together under the same roof is not a precondition for mental cruelty. Boom. Just like that, with one sentence, they completely demolished the High Court's entire argument.
Okay, so how did they connect the dots? How did they link her actions to that definition? Well, they laid it out very logically. Step one, they said her complaints weren't just a normal person seeking justice. They went way beyond that. Step two, they saw her conduct as something calculated to humiliate. And step three, when you add it all up, the police cases, the letters, those wild claims, it amounted to a complete character assassination. Put it all together and the conclusion was clear. Yes, this absolutely qualifies as mental cruelty under the law. But just when you think, okay, Case closed, husband wins. The Supreme Court throws in a final twist. A really surprising final chapter.
So yes, the court sided with the husband. They overturned the high court and they granted the divorce. But that's not the whole story.
Because in that exact same ruling, the court also ordered the husband to pay his now ex-wife 15 lakh rupees as permanent alimony. So think about that. She was the one found to be legally cruel. She was at fault for the divorce, and yet she walks away with a significant financial settlement.
This is where you see a really interesting part of marriage law at play. You might be asking, how on earth can the person who was cruel still get alimony? And the answer is that the court basically treated them as two separate issues. Finding fault for why the marriage ended is one thing, but that doesn't just erase the court's responsibility to make sure a spouse is financially secure after the marriage is over.
So what are the big takeaways? What's the lasting legacy of this case? Well, it sets some huge precedents that are still used today. First, filing false criminal complaints, that can be mental cruelty. Second, going after your spouse's job and reputation, also cruelty. And the big one, you absolutely do not need to live under the same roof to be cruel to each other. It also cemented the idea that if a marriage has been dead for years, that itself can strengthen the case for divorce.
And all of this leaves us with a pretty big question to chew on, doesn't it? This case found fault, but it also demanded financial fairness. So it really makes you think, does our legal system strike the right balance between figuring out who's to blame for a marriage falling apart and making sure everyone can land on their feet financially once it's over? That's a tough one, and it's a debate that is definitely still going on.